All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by my friend, scholar, and clergy, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. How you doing today, sir?
Awesome. Merry new calendar Christmas. Christ is born.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm new
We always
calendar.
have to
I'm
we always
Antiochian.
have to say that. Yeah.
I
Qualify
did
it.
have my Christmas yesterday and went very well. Good quality time with the family.
Yeah.
First Christmas with my wife. So it was special to us and everything went great. So
That's wonderful that we're on the old calendar because we can do Christmas new calendar with our family.
uh-huh.
Um, and then devote not have any distractions come, the 6th and 7th of January, just to devote completely to God. So yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of conversation within the Orthodox circles about the new versus the old calendar, but it is nice being a Westerner, being able to celebrate. But at the same time, we were the only ones going to midnight liturgy. I mean, it started at 10, but we didn't get really done till like 12:30 or something like that. But that's how we spent our Christmas Eve, Ginny and I. It was beautiful. It was really good. And so we had a lot of good memories that we'll be able to share for the rest of our lives. So pretty excited about that. But
Amen. Awesome.
so today, the topic of why we're here, we were actually chatting on the phone, and you said you brought up something that has come up multiple times within your lectures and your philosophy courses at Carroll College there in Montana. And you want to explain a little bit about our topic today and why we thought, you know what, this would be a pretty good topic to stream about and discuss.
Yeah. So and I think that it's come up before when I used to teach in California as well. We were doing Aristotle, his kind of metaphysics and his kind of tiered level of the soul, right? The vegetative, the animal soul, the what he calls the sensitive, and the rational soul. And I started getting, I can see it in my students' face, like, are they kind of, they're not comfortable with something, like, well, how do we know this, and what is rationality? And so I was just kind of going through, just explaining the stuff with Aristotle, and the distinction, how he defines human beings as rational animals.
Mm-hmm.
And a handful of students were getting really upset and started pushing back, like, how do you know that, and blah blah blah. And so it's nice. I went into a fairly in-depth conversation about what we know about language, and study empirical studies together with Aristotle and all this different stuff. Kind of just explaining it. It was help kind of fleshing out what Aristotle's notion of rationality is, and these important distinctions. And but they really, like, five of them, like, really pushed back. They did not like the idea that we would say animals aren't rational
Mm-hmm.
or moral beings. And I found it really bizarre, to be honest. I'm like, I can't believe I found myself in a position that to probably a lot of us, it's kind of, I don't want to say self-evident, but it's kind of self-evident. Like,
Yeah.
of course, animals aren't rational, moral beings. And I kind of tease the students where I'm like, okay, you convinced me. I'll call the governor, Gianforte, and tell him that we should institute doggy and kitty courts, and we'll hold them morally and legally responsible for. Anyways, I thought I finally got through. There was a lot of objections, and I thought I explained this stuff really well. Um, Only to find out that I got a paper basically telling me, a final paper, how I was wrong, and the student has refuted me with their arguments. And I was like, refuted? Okay. So I just, it bothered me. I'm not going to lie. Like, there's a lot of
Right.
things that are wrong, but it caused me to kind of go within myself and then just think about it too. Like, why are people saying this? Um, what's kind of going into this? And that's when I shared with you. And I thought that it touches on a lot of different topics. It touches on our theology, it touches on metaphysics, philosophy of mind, and epistemology. And so I thought this would be a great topic to bring up and to discuss on a stream together. And we've been wanting to do a stream. Forgive me, I've been so busy with all the school and then wrapping up finals and stuff like that. I didn't really get it. We didn't get a chance to do that.
Mm.
Here we are, and what a great topic! I think people will be really interested in.
No, I think so too. And I've put together, we'll get into it. I have about 6 reasons why I think maybe it's why some of the younger generation is having trouble with evaluating who and who is not a rational agent. And I have 10 reasons why I believe animals are not rational or moral beings. And so I look forward to going through that. And we both kind of read through this Stanford, the Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on animal social cognition, and it's attempting to utilize sort of experimental methodology to prove or disprove whether or not animals have rationality, or at least higher orders of cognition and pattern processing. It comes out, it's indeterminate, but the entire article ends with, well, this is a really rich area where science and philosophy can meet, and the walls are now permeable. And some scientists are now seeking the advice of philosophers. So they give you all this research and basically say, yeah, we don't really have anything. We tried to. Seems like 3-year-old children are still outperforming every animal that we we do experiments
Yeah,
on. But I thought before we start getting into some of the academic and secular stuff, maybe we could. I mentioned to you backstage, we'll begin with kind of the theology of rationality. And I think maybe defining what rationality is, and then what role it plays within our Orthodox worldview, our paradigm of understanding the incarnated logos, being made in the image, and all that stuff. So, do you want to begin maybe by discussing rationality? I wrote down, there's epistemic rationality, there's instrumental rationality, and I think sometimes the pursuit of a goal. And people could say, well, animals are rational because predatory species do hunting and they have to take in these calculations or take these methods and make sure they're not seen, they're downwind. Is that not rational behavior? And I think that's really where this debate kind of is focused. And the point that I wanted to start with is that rationality, we can see, is very telos oriented. It's about acquiring a means to something. Now, when we start talking about theology, obviously it's about understanding the truth, which is Christ, capital T, the incarnate logos. And that's going to be very different from a creature acting on instincts to attain a goal. And we'll be able to parse that out a little bit. But you want to speak a little bit like what rationality and what reason is?
yeah. I want to pull up. When you were speaking, I just thought about something. When I wrote this paper, just bear with me 1 second. Is this it? Yeah. On the theology, the icon. So, you know, we say they were made in God's image. The image of God is in man, and that is the logos, right?
Right.
And so part of this is, going to have to do with, logic, like the rational aspect of, and maybe I could just read a few things off my paper.
Sure.
Um, a lot of this is, so there's something obviously distinct about man, and that the being made in the image of God is exactly what allows us for theosis, correct?
Right.
And that it allows us. How do I put this? In the paper, what I'm talking about is to become truly human is to acquire theosis, because
Right.
the image of man is in Christ, right? So he becomes like an image of himself when he incarnates in man, right? Because it lifts man up to what he's actually supposed to be. And this actually explains the Christophanies too. He looks like man because true man is Christ,
Right.
even before the incarnation. And so, man and the cosmos, as Demetrius Stanislaus says, are equally a product of the creative act of God, which is above nature. And we look at the cosmos and it's intelligible. It's organized in a way for the capacity of knowing. And they're intimately human nature. There's something in the human being that's connected with the cosmos that's stamped with rationality, Demetrius Stanislaus says. While man, God's creature, is further endowed with reason, capable of knowing consciously the rationality of the cosmos, of his own nature. So notice we're already starting to get an idea theologically what the fathers and the saints mean by rationality, to be able to comprehend the entire cosmos and man's nature within it so that he can contemplate God.
Right.
And so I point out that much like Martin Heidegger, who says Dasein, right, is the only being, we're the only beings in which being's a question. Well, think about this in terms of animals. Well, we're the only animals that can say that in which rationality is a question or concern. As Demetrius Stanislaus puts it, quote, to be the only being which, while belonging to the visible world and stamped with rationality, is conscious both of its rationality it possesses and simultaneously of itself. And I argue that this is similar to the anthropic principle in in physics that's been developed recently in the last 20 years, that basically says the world's so structured that it's observable. Isn't that interesting? That it's knowable, that it's intelligible, so that we rational beings, anthropos, can observe, know, and understand it. In other words, here's a great way to summarize the anthropic principle. Where else would you find rational beings to be other than a place that is capable of being understood? The world's uniquely situated, not coincidentally so, for the existence of man. And I'll just read one more page because I think it's really important theologically to now understand this. The world is intelligible and possesses rationality, which proves that the cosmos is the product of a rational being, as Stanley explains. Quote, since rationality is an aspect of reality which is destined to be known, has no explanation apart from conscious reason, which knows it from time it creates it, or even before that time, and knows it continually so long that the same reason, capital R, preserves its being. On the other hand, this is amazing. The cosmos itself would be meaningless, along with its rationality, if there were no human reason that might come to know the cosmos of its rational character, end quote. So I say we're called to come to know the world, the cosmos, because of its rational character. And in coming to know the world, we come to know ourselves, and vice versa. To know thyself is to know the world. The world provides a material basis for its existence, the understanding of it, and in turn, understanding of ourselves. However, as Stanley points out, quote, the world, by contributing in this passive manner to our formulation, to our deepening of our self-conscious, does not itself, through this contribution, become conscious of itself. Mm-hmm. What this means, as he explains, and I put this, you guys will love this, and I did put it in my paper, contra vegans and secular environmental warriors. What this means is that, listen to this quote from Stanley, we are not for the sake of the world, but the world is for us. Although man does also need the world, the point of the world is to be found in man, not vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Even the fact that we are aware that we need the world shows man's superior position vis-a-vis the world. For the world is not able to feel our need for it. The world existing as an unconscious object exists for man. It is subordinate to man, even though he did not create it. And I go on to basically explain in this that through this unique nature that we have, what we call rationality, man is called to entirely humanize the cosmos vis-a-vis his superior position. Because in doing this, he becomes a co-worker with God and elevates all of nature right into the kingdom.
Right.
Paradise lost is paradise restored. And that to become truly human is to become divine. And
Well,
so
and that plays within some of the things that I wrote down concerning a sort of
awesome.
an orthodox theological approach to rationality is, as you mentioned, the logos. I mean, within the Greek philosophical tradition, I mean, sometimes it was translated as reason, the word, these types of things. So there was already this understanding of this elevated, for them, a sort of abstract philosophical principle. But what that does in regards to our understanding of being made in the image of God, that it gives us freedom and moral agency. So as we said, rationality is always a sort of means to an end. And the point of rationality is to be free moral agents, to freely choose the right, the good, the beautiful, in opposition to sin, to that which is separated from God. And I point to Matthew 5:48, to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And animals are governed by instinct. They lack this understanding of moral duty, higher principles, sin. And so this all relates back to then communion and relationality, that one of the elements of our reason and our rationality being made in the image of God allows us meaningful relationships and communion, which reflects the Trinitarian Godhead himself. And that that reason can then be creative in a transformative capacity in which we get to participate in God's creative work, whether it be through art, science, governance. Now, all these things are sort of secular works, but humans can shape the world around them in ways that reflect the divine wisdom of being made in the image. But when we look at the fall of Adam and Eve, there's a utilization of reason there. Eve was told that you could become like God. And so reason, rationality isn't necessarily good or bad. And we can see that rationality was used in a corruptive manner to take something that didn't yet belong, and then human nature itself fell. And so Christ in the incarnation, the Logos, is the restorer of true rationality. But what does that mean, true rationality? In my estimation, it has to do with the healing of the corruption of the fall itself and focusing on what is the ultimate end. If rationality is a means toward an end, do I use reason to get advantage over people? If it's about communion, well, then within this light of the Logos, reason is used to communicate honestly, truthfully, empathetically to the people around you. It's not about lying and manipulation, which could also be used through the instrument of rationality. And so we can see in scripture that Adam is not the same thing as the animals of creation. We were given dominion over creation. Genesis 1:26-28. We are the stewards that reflect God's wisdom and love for creation. And even the naming of the animals symbolizes some sort of cognitive and ontological and anthropological distinction between the animal kingdom itself.
And superiority,
Superiority. And one of the things that I wanted to point towards is this rational reorientation through Christ is also, as Orthodox Christians, we understand the mind isn't some disembodied aspect of this tripartite anthropology of mind, body, and soul, but the nous is actually it's all related. And so I wrote down, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, is that after Christ, we have a noetic reasoning, that as we as we use our rational capabilities in pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and to become more like Christ, as you pointed to theosis, we can also develop a noetic reasoning, which is really moving beyond reason itself, although it's utilized in gaining sort of spiritual intuition and insight that isn't totally just secular apprehension of the world around us. And so,
Yeah,
so,
excellent.
so that noetic faculty, that noetic reasoning is highlighting that rationality as this unique component of humanity being made in the image of God has to ultimately be oriented towards the ultimate end, which is God, which is Jesus Christ, which is theosis. And in that process, you can attain noetic reasoning and insights like that. But that walk is a walk by faith. And so I'm sure you'll get into the revelation of these things being revealed to us through tradition and scripture. But to walk down that path for noetic cleansing and attaining a sort of closer spiritual insight with God, that takes a walk by faith, which is beyond reason itself. And so I feel like, as Orthodox always is, it's always both and.
Yeah, I think about like Venn diagrams, because this came up the other day. Somebody was saying that, and I've seen this happen several times, where they believe these spheres are completely distinct. So somebody says, "Oh, you could be a moral relativist." It doesn't mean that truth is relative. And I didn't chime in. I was just interested to see what other people in Discord were going to say, but I could easily refute that by saying, "Oh, yeah, ought I to believe that's true?" And so there's something really interesting between these spheres that are distinct. And if I had a Venn diagram up, the moral sphere is distinct from the epistemic sphere, or the veridical, right, in some sense. Yet they overlap. So that while being distinct, right, morality implies what? Truth, objective truth. And truth implies morality, because if I say, "Did you give me a true statement?" Yes. So ought I to believe that? Yes. So they're intrinsically linked, very much so like the classical transcendentals, veritas bonum pulcherum, the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? Yeah, they are distinct, but they're together. So if we did a Venn diagram with 3 circles, and what you're saying is that rationality implies morality, morality implies rationality, and all of that in the tripartite Venn diagram of the noetic, right? Because it's through those, and the human soul that we call the rational soul has those 3 things. And if we pull any one out, right, and make the others subservient, I really like the idea of the Venn diagram with the top circle being the nous, the heart. But these serve the hearts. But notice through the entire history of philosophy, what do people do? They pull this out. Well, it's about rationality, or it's about well, rationality doesn't matter. It's just morality or something like that. And so for those to be in proper symphony together under the obedience of nous, like you said, those things serve the noetic faculties so that we may become like God. And that we may be co-workers with God to bring paradise into all of creation, as Demetrius Sanders says, to fully humanize all of nature. So I like exactly what you had to say. And what was I going to say? Yeah, if we're made in the image of the Logos, right? And I wanted to end the conversation with the class and be like, well, I could just stop this right now and be like, how do we know? Because human beings are made in the image of God, and animals are. How about that? We could go through all this Aristotelian philosophy and these different philosophies, but like ultimately, how do I know that? Because of divine revelation.
Right.
Which, if you deny, you don't know you have no grounds to say anything. part of that divine logos being made in the image of God is the tripartite Venn diagram that I talked about. Rational, moral, noetic beings. And guess what? Animals aren't that.
Right. And again, just to emphasize the point, because I've seen people use the term logic and rationality or reason interchangeably. And this is a misunderstanding. I'm sure in your classes, you've probably seen students do this. And so just to give a really brief distinction is logic is about basically the principles of proper reasoning. Reasoning is a faculty that all of us possess, being made in the image of God, all humans. And you can use rationality, as we said, to do very mischievous things that are detrimental to the people around you, but because it's always rationality is always a goal-oriented practice that you may attain the goal that you set forth, but it may not be a good goal for the people around you. Where logic, it's a formal discipline dealing with valid reasoning and inference. We're talking about syllogisms. We're talking about propositional calculus to assess the validity of arguments. So logic is something that exists in the world. This is where we get to the tag argument for God. These metaphysical, these transcendental categories that exist that, in a sense, we have through our rational capabilities and the observation have come to understand that there is a logical basis for utilizing our rational capacity. And so it's a much rationality is a much broader encompassing category than just logical reasoning and other cognitive faculties. So it involves application of logic and also includes judgment and ambiguous or uncertain situations where strict logical rules may not suffice. So logic is a discipline of understanding proper reasoning and truth claims, making sure that our reasoning isn't fallacious. But many people, because we're made in the image of God, can use their reason for very fallacious means. You there? It looks like you froze.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold off on. I froze.
Okay, no, you're back.
Did I freeze? I'm joking. Well, what happens is I try to switch over to the YouTube to see the chat, and then it always starts freezing up for some reason. So I just want
it's
to see
because
what people are
that slow
saying in the
Montana
chat.
internet. I'm kidding.
Yeah, that's yeah.
But concerning, unless you had a point you wanted to get into regarding what I just said, I
want to hold off. Like you're hitting on points that I want to set up for later.
So regarding to this argument that animals are rational,
give us kind of a language to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. In regards to the argumentation that animals are rational, can you you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think part of it, and I have a list of, again, reasons why I think people believe this, and I have 10 reasons why I don't believe animals are rational. But there is and we kind of mentioned this over the phone, there is maybe it's not an explicit agenda, but due to Darwinian evolutionary thinking, there isn't a push in the academy and scholastic philosophy to define theories of mind in which are very ambiguous. So my work with transhumanism, the dominant theory of mind is functionalism. So if the function can be performed, but 2 + 2 = 4 on a calculator, or 2 + 2 = 4 in my mind, the function is performed. We see a level of rational, sentient, or understanding of pattern recognition to some degree. This is, and we're not arguing for functional theories of mind. I'm saying this is what people believe.
It's the leading theory in philosophy of mind, even when I was doing my grad work too.
And it's the building presupposition of like being able to transfer. So move out, interchange biological neurons with synthetic parts is how you're going to be able to upload your brain to a computer and live forever. These abstract understandings of mind, which is all input, output, stimuli. That's what functionalism is. So if the input is 2 + 2 and the output is 4, well, then we can see that it's working, and therefore we can draw a correlation between the two things, and that there is an effort to devalue mankind to the level of an animal. That was all I was getting at, whether it be functionalism, functionalist theories of mind, or some of this vegan stuff. I mean, what we're seeing at a larger scale, just like you said, the environmental warriors, is it's not in elevation. And that's why I wanted to begin with the theology. And we would look at before the fall, Adam giving dominion over creation, naming the animals. And then after the fall, in a sense, we become more like animals because of the darkness of our noetic faculties, and reason has just run amok, and it really doesn't have the true orientation to guide itself by. And so now in the 21st century, we see the whole impetus of academia is to devalue man to essentially being an animal that has a few extra parts or a few extra capabilities, but those are temporary, and the computers are going to gain those capabilities. And if we just left the Darwinian video game run long enough, well, the chimpanzees will gain them too, because it's all just an emergent process.
Yeah, I thought about the same thing too that you did. I was like the kind of thought, how did we get here? How did this person get to hold such an absurd belief? And I'll agree with you. I'll say first and foremost, my culprit who I want to blame this on, did I tell you?
Disney,
because kids, parents let them watch Disney movies with talking animals all the time. Yeah, maybe. No, but in a more serious note, like you said, so let's look philosophically. We're kind of an amalgamation of various philosophical influences. Well, obviously modernity. Okay, what is modernity marked by? I think two things, starting with Descartes: skepticism, radical skepticism, and the mechanization of nature. And what do I mean by that? The denial of, and by the way, you got to get this book, Real Essentialism.
Real Essentialism. Never heard of that one.
Yeah, it's basically, essences. And it's pretty much a defense of, and not a defense, but a breakdown of Aristotelian essences, taxonomy, like how he developed his logic, the reality of knowing essences, the structure of an essence and identity, aspects of life, biological, the person, etc. It's fantastic. It might be a bit expensive, but it's well worth. Okay, well, what does Descartes do? All those goofs deny that there's immaterial essences.
Right.
So whether you're an Aristotelian or a Platonic
or a total
realism,
skeptic.
Yeah, and then what happens? The kind of skepticism. So the problem of other minds comes about through Descartes. Well, if I start with myself and all I can know is myself presenting thoughts, and anytime I'm thinking I exist, I don't have that sort of access with you. And so I can't ever be sure if Patrick's actually, he's displaying all this stuff, but I mean, I could be deceived. Like, you could be automaton. I noticed that was in my students and in the paper, right? I mean, how they always brought this up. How do we know? I mean, how do we know? I mean, just because they're not, and I'm like, that's
which could be levied right back at them and claiming the affirmative that animals are rational. Well, how do you know that?
Yeah. Well, I said too, I'm like, well, you could go that route. I know how you're being influenced by this, but I'm like, if you want to do that, how do we know? We can't be sure. Then you've opened up a whole can of worms of, you don't know anybody in this room is. And
Right.
That's the importance of having a kind of metaphysics that's going to inform these things about how we actually know. So I would say that we're influenced, the people today are influenced by modernity, being marked by this kind of radical skepticism and mechanization of nature. Then what do you get? Behaviorism. So then it just does away with the Cartesian, because they were like, well, that's mysterious. I can never access your thoughts, or like, it's this first person thing. And, what kind of quality does it have, and how does it interact? You're telling me it interacts through the pineal gland? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, this is all so they're like, it doesn't sound very scientific. Why don't we just redefine what thought is in terms of input, in terms of third person scientific objective language, where it's just, well, you have this input causes, right? And kind of rules and dispositions to behave in a certain way, i.e., output. And all it is to have the thought that it's raining is nothing internally mysterious, but it's simply, if it's raining, the external stimuli, then given the sort of kind of rules and mechanism, all third person objectively observable and accessible, it's just your disposition to close the windows or carry an umbrella out. That's all there is to be a thought. Now I've got this kind of materialism, and as you said, then behaviorism just goes into functionalism, and this is what sets up for all the AI stuff. So those two things.
And behavioralism, it is building an anthropology based on instinct, right? So it's really it's basing it's an understanding of the human person or an organism by Pavlovian responses, just building instinct responses to exterior stimuli. And this is why when we're talking about dogs, and one of the things you mentioned about making creation or turning creation, using our reason to move creation into a higher form that represents our own unique relationship with God, is like dogs. I was one of a conversation we were having in fellowship one day was talking about how dogs, when with a human and it's trained, it actually gains a level of awareness that maybe it wouldn't have in the total wild, and that animals are slowly taking on our own unique image, but they don't have the image. Just because you have a dog and maybe it's highly trained doesn't mean that it's a rational agent. It's just demonstrating this sympathetic relationship between us and creation when done in a correct manner. And animals, when we're getting into rationality, you have to understand that this is built on pattern recognition and conceptual thought. So whether you're talking about dogs or elephants or dolphins in the ocean, the difference is they may have incredibly high IQ within the animal kingdom or pattern recognition, the way we defined it, but that doesn't mean that they can understand conceptual thought. This has been demonstrated with gorillas that learn sign language, that they may know 80 or 100 words in sign language, but that doesn't mean they understand language. That doesn't mean that they can apprehend conceptual thoughts and put patterns together. And that was part of the article that we were reading on animal social cognition, is that's what they were showing, is that, for example, one of the studies had to do with chimpanzees, and they were testing how quickly they would understand the difference of a gaze. So when you looked at it or looked away from it in response because they wanted food. GAZE. And what it demonstrated is that mature chimpanzees actually were less responsive to understanding the symbolic importance of a gaze than a 2 to 3-year-old child. So the child may have a lower IQ than the adult chimpanzee based on pattern recognition, but at the same time, how does the human child, the 2 to 3-year-old, understand symbolically the differences between interpersonal communication and the subtlety of a gaze?
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. That'll get into, let me just add 2 more things that I think are an influence, and then let's come back to that. This is where I actually think that Immanuel Kant, and Sellers and those who follow after him, like Donald Davidson, Robert Brandom, and stuff like this, and they talk about the space of reason, right? The logical space of reason, and what it is to have knowledge, a belief, etc. That language is really going to help us and show us. And they actually come out and say, like, animals don't have this, don't have concepts and stuff. Well, let's talk about that. That's a great point. But let me just finish. See if you agree with this.
Okay.
Possible 2 other influences. Obviously, Darwinianism. um, that since there's the abolition of essences, so in antiquity, essences is exactly what delineated essentially species.
Right. That's the
So
whole, yeah, that's the whole
now you have
category.
nominalism, and these are just names. There's no real distinction between any of the living species. What did you say? It's just maybe more of this, which is exactly what I saw in the paper. Is the student had basically said, well, just because you can do this doesn't mean that you're essentially different or from, an animal or something. It's like, well, there's another that's Darwinian. So nominalism, Darwinianism, and my third one, I think postmodernity, especially the Frankfurt School. And their notice both in feminism and veganism, I think a lot of this comes out of the critical theory. And so one of the things that it does is basically it's an attempt to deconstruct the traditions of antiquity and the Christian traditions by what? Deconstructing it, doing the opposite, to make real distinct, to blur the lines, as you always say. What's the phrase that
A
you
dissolution of boundaries.
the dissolution of boundaries. And so notice the language that's being used now. Well, that's speciesism,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's an oppressive, racist kind of way. Don't be a racist to animals, right? It's the racism of animals, right?
But
Like,
you're a
I'm
species.
no kidding. They're acting like this.
Right. Well, and you can see again the lack of logically principled rationality is that they're using the reason in a way in which gets them to conclusions which devalues the uniqueness of mankind itself. And they view this as a sort of progress, but really it's a digression. And that movement, that momentum can be felt. They're perceiving it, and I think it gets back to the noetic apparatus of man, and that theirs are clouded by, and we are all clouded. That's me and Father Deacon. I'll speak for myself. Clearly a much detritus on my noetic faculties, but um, the momentum of creating new novel interpretations, this is seen as progress. And because be it lies, be it misconceptions from birth, because I throw anthropomorphization as one of the reasons why I believe so many people are giving human-like qualities and attributes to animals, Disney being one. But also we see the fur baby cultural movement where now your pets are
Yeah.
supplanting children, which is a total selfish, fallen understanding of what a parent is and the role of being a parent and why that is a held position. So I had a few more. I had 6 that I wrote down on why I think people are doing this. The other one
Yeah.
that I had was sophisticated animal behavior, as we've mentioned. So some animals, yes, they display complex behaviors. Um, Elephants use tools, monkeys can use tools, social hunting, orcas and dolphins looking at a way that they can organize in groups to hunt. Incredibly intelligent. Does that mean they're rational entities? No, because without understanding of the biological base of these actions, people overestimate their cognitive capacities. And yes, they appear rational, but they're governed by instinct and trial and error learning. It's still
Mhm.
it's still a sense of using an autonomous organism with high IQ, still learning the world through, in a sense, a sort of Pavlovian response. That is not high levels of rationality and conceptual thinking. Another one I wrote down is emotional bonds. Humans are attached to pets or charismatic species and can lead to biased views attributing emotions and reasoning to their actions. So we've seen like elephants, they mourn the death of other elephants. But does that mean their understandings of social bonds, family, moral duties is the same as us? Of course not. Of course not. Misinterpretation of intelligence. So, and we have a few super chats. I want to answer some of those because they're hitting at things that we're discussing right now. But the misinterpretation of intelligence, problem solving ability in animals is often mistaken for rationality. As we're saying, it's not. though intelligence can operate without abstract reasoning. And that's what animals are doing. So a crow using tools is demonstrating adaptability, not logical deliberation. And the influence of popular media, you talked about books, movies, documentaries, frequently anthropomorphizing animals. And then the last one, the philosophical and ethical agenda. Some individuals argue for animal rationality to promote animal rights or environmental causes. You already hit on that.
Yeah.
While they may be noble in some sense, they sometimes exaggerate animal cognitive capacities to align with the goals of human beings.
Yep. Oh, one other thing. Like you see in a lot of things, there's equivocation on the word rationality.
Mhm.
You could use, how do I put this? I could look at my cat and be like, and say something about, they are obviously they had reasons to go over and get their food,
Mhm.
right? I can talk about my cat loves me, right? Well, in some sense, I'm speaking in a very loose, as you'd pointed out, and the article points out too, part of the problem is anthropomorphizing, that we're going to interpret everything anthropomorphically, right? And
Mhm.
if we see similarities, we're going to be like, well, obviously, this is like me, right? So it must be. So we need to be careful. That's why I thought it was good that, first of all, we started theologically, and then we'll go in philosophically of, look, you can be kind of loose, fast and loose with the word intelligence, rational, like stuff like that,
Mhm.
love,
Or
um,
emotions, right? So
emotion. Yeah,
because some of the article was trying to get into like the emotional dimension of animals. Well, as you said, you say your cat loves you. We're using our own concept of love and implanting that in the behavioral patterns of animals. And we
yeah,
don't know that and we can't know that for a fact.
yes. And so we need to distinguish between, am I going to let you colloquially say that, obviously, if somebody says, well, it seems that they're rational because they made a choice based on obviously some type of reason or something like that, versus, okay, what do we mean technically by rationality? And we'll define that and say, absolutely not. There's no way animals could have that.
Right.
So I'd say that's, problem is equivocation of words. And you're equivocating on what it means to be rational or love or something like that, usually based on kind of a loose anthropomorphization of, yeah. What else? Let's talk about. Oh, do you wanted to answer some?
Yeah, we have a few super chats that have
Okay.
already they've asked some questions regarding what we've already discussed. Ortho Cuber throws in $5. Thank you so much, Ortho Cuber. He says Christmas liturgy is one of the least attended services at my church. Is this typical? I think people might be going to Vespers instead, but I don't know. I think it's a parish by parish thing. Christmas service certainly wasn't as well attended as the Pascha service, but Pascha is the epitome of our liturgical celebrations. Um, I don't know. I was thinking that it was maybe a cultural thing because I had to leave one of our family. We have a family gathering on Christmas Eve, and so I had to leave. Jenny and I had to leave early to go to church. Maybe it's just a lot of people have a lot of family commitments during the time of Christmas. So I'm not sure, Ortho Cuber, but it may be a general. Do you have a thought on that before we get into? We have three more questions that are specifically regarding rationality.
Well, there's a charitable thought and an uncharitable. The uncharitable is because they've been drinking and sinning and couldn't make it. um, I think, Patrick, you're right. It's various reasons, you know, across the board, given various parishes, and you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Different places, different things. So it's hard to say. You can't really boil it down to one because, like you said, some may not. But I think if there was, I'm assuming new calendar Christmas, there's the Christmas morning's the opening of the Red Ryder BB gun and all the gifts.
Don't shoot your eye
Um,
out.
yeah, Christmas morning. Like, so I think people like, well, I could go to Vespers and then, we'll have the family over Christmas morning. So if there is anything, that could be a possible explanation. Good question,
Yep.
though.
This was a super chat sent in over on your channel. Father
Yeah.
Deacon Dave Davis throws in $10, says animals can be, quote, rational in that they do things to get rewards. You can teach pet tricks and reward pets for doing tricks. Pets or animals being moral. Now that's a different debate.
So thanks, Dave. That illustrates exactly what we're talking about, and he puts in quotation marks. And this is what I saw among my students as they were using examples like that. Really intelligent behavior, specifically when you get into these cases of the chimp or the ape and stuff like that. And which they say, well, see, they're being rational. And I think that illustrates we're not being judicious with our language. That's kind of a colloquial way of saying, but it's not strictly what we mean by rational. So great question. It illustrates exactly what we talked about.
And then White Lightning 777 throws in $5 on this channel and says most animals operate on instinct. Agreed. But a few, such as dolphins, have an IQ the same as our own. This has been scientifically proven. So I don't know if they're trying to say, again, we've already addressed some of the problematic dimensions of equating pattern recognition with rationality. Those are not the same thing. And I also am not convinced that animals have language. So it's more of the Noam Chomsky school of linguistics.
Yeah.
I do believe that animals
Yeah.
have communication, and when you get into dolphins and orcas, these are some of the highest levels of communication that we find in the animal kingdom. Is that language? That's another question, because again, when we were talking about rationality and language, now we're getting into abstract conceptual categories and the ability to hold these and then define them in multiple ways. Is communication in the animal kingdom really built on survivability and, again, a sort of fulfillment of instinctual drives? I would be in the camp that would argue that that's the case. What are your thoughts on IQ and language?
Well, first of all, I'm just generally skeptical of IQ tests. And I think it would illustrate again, there's as some of the articles went in on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is there was one I forgot to send to you, is on animal cognition. And so it was talking about the science, and it warned about basically philosophical assumptions in the study of animal cognition, theory-latedness, value-latedness, objectivity, and simplicity. Like, goes through these different things and saying, this is exactly what one of the problems is. So again, you don't just look at the data and like, well, obviously it's the same as IQ is us or something like that. The thing is you're anthropomorphizing. You have theory-lated. There's all these presuppositions that are packed into that. And it's kind of begging the question, again, what is in question is, are they the same? So what you can't do is, so what that would mean then is, if they're not the same, then how do I put this? What would appear to be same, it's like the argument that we make again if people critique orthodoxy, like the Roman Catholics. Well, you got a problem here. It's like, yeah, but the same problem in two different systems is remarkably and essentially different. I'd say the same thing, that it's like you're starting from this kind of myth of the given, and already begging the question that, well, we're all equal, and so these things that I'm interpreting must be equal, so they have the same sort of kind of IQ. So even if they display kind of behaviorally the same things, they radically mean something different. The IQ in a dolphin means something radically different than a human being. In fact, essentially different. So I'd say that's the first mistake right there. Um, and I never want to go to something. It's like my students try to go to an example of quantum mechanics to illustrate some problem we were having in philosophy. And I'm like, don't go to more obscure things. I mean, quantum mechanics to explain something, that's ridiculous. So again, don't go to a higher controversial IQ. Like, I'm already doubting that. That's not going to shed light on if something's, far less certain, and you're citing that to build a case. I would say that that's a bad move in itself.
Well, I think what
But
they're
your third
doing,
point is actually your point, which would be my third point, is absolutely correct. That ignores all that tells you. All a IQ test tells you nothing about what we want. The ability to discriminate and do these different things, these what would quote unquote be intelligent behavior, does not actually show you if an animal is rational or not.
right, and demonstrating the ability to perceive pattern recognition, like you said, IQ.
That's all IQ is. Yeah.
That's all IQ is, and that is that we have to make sure that we're not equating that with rationality itself. These things are two separate things, even though IQ can aid an entity in utilizing rationality in certain ways. So anyways, next question. Bobby C threw in $10 over on your channel and said, appreciate the discussion. My question is regarding self-awareness. When an octopus changes its color and texture, doesn't that demonstrate some sort of self-awareness? Where does that play in?
So first of all, this is one thing that gets confused in philosophy, concerning philosophy in mind. People in philosophy in mind are not confused about this. Consciousness means a first person subjective qualitative awareness of what Thomas Nagel calls qualia, right? Phenomenal consciousness, as we say in philosophy of mind. People think that consciousness means self-awareness. That's not true. So we would ascribe consciousness, a first person kind of what it's like to experience something, to animals, maybe going all the way down to octopus. I don't know. When you get further down the line, it's not as clear. But that's categorically something that being aware of your environment is different than being self-aware. In philosophy of mind, that's made really clear. So first, I'm not even sure if changing color and texture means they're conscious. All that simply means is it has that thing has an ability to react to its environment. Like the praying mantis or something. You wouldn't say like, well, look, it's conscious. I put my finger in it. Or like a sea anemone or something, like let alone that it's actually aware of itself. So the tests for self-awareness are far different than actually are much more complicated, at least empirically, of determining does something aware versus is it aware of itself.
Right. And I think morality comes into this discussion, although I've seen some academic, well, even in the Stanford article, it brought this up to some degree, that self-awareness or being aware of an octopus in its environment and camouflaging itself due to survivability based on instinct, based on genetic predispositions as a species, are very different than the self-awareness or consciousness that's often used in the theory of mind regarding a self-aware conscious entity and the decisions that you make. As soon as you're equating self-awareness or self-sentience to animals, what you're doing or what you need to ask yourself is, are they moral characters then, which is part of the discussion today? Because if they are, then that means animals would be held to make morally right or wrong choices. And what I found is a lot of these people don't believe that. So people like the vegans or the environmental warriors, they may subscribe self-awareness to animals, but when you push them on can they make morally wrong choices, they'd say, well, of course not. Well, then
Yeah,
what exactly does it mean then to be totally self-aware and self-conscious? Because that's what we mean as humans.
funny enough, when I was going through this, I thought about our other famous stream that we did, Empty Heads,
Yeah.
and how people are devolving to the state of animality.
Yes.
And just to point out that there is that tie that you're
Right.
talking about.
And so we can see that people rationally are finding and using means to acquire pornography, sexually explicit content. And that's then leading people to not form traditional relationships, have children, long-term pair bonding, all this different stuff. That is becoming, they're using reason to actually become less rational and less human. We're seeing it, as you said, a devolving into more animalistic mentalities. And when we talk about the coom pod, where you'll be able to coom all day and eat your bugs, and the instinctual drives will be satisfied. But is that good? So if we just satisfy the instinctual drives of man, is that freedom? Again, that's like the whole Orthodox book by Ross, The Freedom of Morality, is saying, no, freedom is actually the ability to make moral choices in light of Christ. That's the only thing that is true freedom. And so we can see that there's an agenda, whether it be the transhumanist movement or just the general technocrats of the global order, to make people more like animals so that we're more dependent on a sort of Pavlovian instinctual drive, as opposed to, again, when we read the life of the saints, this is where the theological component comes in, is we can see saints do things that seem to be irrational for their safety or again, their instinctual drives. And yet there's a higher purpose. They're using reason instrumentally for a higher end. And that's really the goal. And that's how we become more than human. And when we look at Christ, I always bring this up, like when he's gives himself up on the cross, he says, it is complete. The image of man is complete. And we see that he's making a rational choice for a higher purpose in defiance from his instinctual animalistic drive.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. Let's see. Do we have any other? While you're talking, I'm trying to find.
Yeah.
Some
Bobby
things
C
here
sent
that I
another
want to bring
question
up.
on. Oh, send in another question. He says, is it fair to say that we see as intelligence or awareness in animals is akin to what we see in AI programming? Now, that's an interesting question. That is to say, a feature of design/creation. What are your thoughts on that?
Hold on. Let me look at the chat. Is it fair to say that we see as intelligent? Well, that's what I read from Staniloy.
Right.
The fact that you see these things is stamp of the creator, right? The creator and his rationality stamped all throughout the universe. In other words, so.
But is an AI program rational? Because this is getting into the theory of mind, and this is where
I see. Yeah, I see what
he's saying is the intelligence or self-awareness of animals akin to AI programming that we claim is also aware and rational. And I would say that there's an interesting relationship, because I would argue that the instinctual drive of animals is essentially confined within the input-output environment in which they exist, which I would argue that's what AI is. It's an input-output programming. And this is why how you define awareness or mind or consciousness or sentience is so important, and why we began by discussing functionalism as a theory of mind. Because if you're going to relegate intelligence to input and output, well, then they're making the claim that absolutely that the AI is rational, that animals in a sense are rational, and that humans are some medium point between where the machines are going and where the animals came from. But
yeah,
I would
that's
argue
why.
not.
So, yeah, I wouldn't equate them actually for the exact reasons. So, for materialists, they're reductive. They're reductive. If functionalism is reductive, whether you're an identity theorist, logical behaviorist, or a functionalist, or an eliminative materialist like Dennett, the idea is to reduce those in different philosophical, epistemological, or ontological ways to it's simply matter. What's interesting is the anti-AI, right? Like John Searle's Chinese Room and John Searle himself are all irreducibility of consciousness arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So we do know that animals have consciousness of what it's like, and that cannot be reduced. And we know this, what I'd say, through all the irreducibility of consciousness arguments in philosophy of mind to simply the material parts, the function, etc. So if you're from a behaviorist, they're like, well, they both look and act intelligent. They pass the Turing test, so they must both be rationally intelligent and stuff like that. No, that's why some of the philosophy of mind stuff is really important on that. But like, there's an essential distinction. You could get the two acting exactly the same, or obviously in the AI, even in a higher capacity, it doesn't mean that they're rational. So one of the things that all conscious beings are not rational, but all rational beings have consciousness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I would actually say that's really important to make the distinction between the two.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good
good
point.
question.
Josh Betts sends in another question. Says, "What about when pets express guilt?" And I have a dog, and my previous dog, I had a pit bull. Now I have a Bernedoodle. But certainly, when they made a mess in the house, you now us describing it as guilt, I would describe it as a recognition that when behavioral A happens, the other thing that happens following that is something that they don't like, and they are, I don't know, shying away from what they believe is going to be the output of based some type of stimulus or response. So when my dog made a mess in the house, meaning he went to the bathroom or he threw up, yeah, he would kind of cower away. He would shy away from you, and all this. Does that mean it's guilt? Does he rationally understand the categories of behavior that have occurred here? I would say not. And so there's an interesting study where they showed like what some type of ocean crab. They put electrodes into a tank and they began to experience what these experimenters said as anxiety. But the question that the experiment left is, because these crabs are demonstrating some type of neural response to the potentiality of being shocked, does that mean that they're experiencing human emotions like anxiety? No. It's a behavioralism. It's an input output response. And some of those crabs went over there and got shocked, and they came back to the other side of the tank. And now the other ones, they don't want to get shocked. And so they can experience these things. That, to me, it's a step lower than human cognition and rationality.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
and then we had two
And
super chats over on Dono
do you have
chat.
another one? Because I want to add to that.
Yeah. Oh no, go ahead then. Add to it before we
Okay.
move on.
No. Do those, and I want to come back to that point
Okay.
because it'll just segue
Abe
into our next
Troyer,
topic.
the Amish president, threw in $5 and says, "Newly illuminated on Christmas Eve. Well, glory to God, brother." He said, "I found orthodoxy through the crucible. Thank you for your content and Happy New Year." Well, God bless you, Abe Troyer. Merry Christmas and blessed nativity to you and your family. And then Justin Henley throws in $10, no comment. Thank you so much, Justin Henley, for the support. Do appreciate that. And so, guys, if you have any questions for FDA or myself, just send in questions or comments on our YouTube channels, and then we'll address all that stuff here. And if you would like, I prefer to use Streamlabs or Dono Chat, and I'll address all that as well. And if you guys are still feeling merry after the Western celebration of Christmas, depending on what calendar you're on, please give some memberships in the chat. Everybody in the chats always appreciate that. So, what was it you wanted to come back to?
I feel like I'm Jay Dyer with the always touching the glasses. It's probably because they don't fit or something. I don't know. Okay, so going back to that thing, because that was some of my students. They were like, "Well, my dog knows that they did bad," and I speak anthropomorphically that to my cat.
Right.
And one of my cats, very intelligent, and they're growing and evolving too. And I put on Twitter like a month ago, my cat's learning certain stuff. And as you had pointed out too, I think animals are given for our salvation. I think
Yes.
there's a
We're not
type of,
we're not actually demeaning animals.
yeah, and that animals from the feral life to the domestic are lifted up beyond, because
Yes.
this is what we're doing with our creation. And then the creation itself is pedagogically guiding us. And I think animals are essential to that, to teach us something about God and salvation. I really do believe that. And so they begin to become more just as we do, right?
Mhm.
We're demonstrating something of God, right? That God enters into a relationship and we become more than what we were. Don't we do the same thing with animals? We bring them in and they're lifted up and they start to display some of the qualities of human beings, just like human beings start to display some of the qualities of God, even though
Right.
they can't become uncreated. And through the energies and the activities of one's life that they live.
Right.
And I think that's really beautiful. And I watch my cats learn to watch TV, and it's not just, it's really interesting because, and I put this up, I caught him watching a documentary on Da Vinci, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So first it was reading Descartes, now it's Da Vinci. And I'm watching and I'm studying my cat. It's not just seeing just colors moving. It's starting to learn to focus in on the right information, like where the essential information is. It's strange. Um, and I can see that I'm like, that's remarkably intelligent. I can see that I could say anthropomorphically, when I yell at my cat, get down from the cabinet or something like that. Oh, it knows, and it shows that it's. But here's what I think's going on at the high intelligence of animality, and then this will transition into apes and stuff like that, which would be apes and dolphins, maybe the highest primates, right? In
Right.
terms of intelligence. Um, as you said, there is cognition. That's important. There's
Absolute cognition.
consciousness, there's an awareness, right? Of what it's like that the animal has that a plant or rock does not. So it's not just simply reacting, it's aware, it's a sentient, right? It has consciousness. It has a level of intelligence in terms of cognition. So what it's doing combined with instinct, it's linking, I think it has memory, right?
Mhm.
And I think it can even collect memories, right? And it's kind of putting them together. I associate this, and this is why Pavlovian training is so successful in terms of pleasure and pain.
Right.
Um, and that's what's going on, is you're starting to see qualities that look like you, like the ears down and the tail, right? Well, that it doesn't know that it's done bad, even though we say, oh, it's no poor guy knows he did wrong. Um, you're reading stuff in, you're anthropomorphizing. Like you said, there's a cognition process. It's linking that to, this is a painful or unpleasurable experience. I remember that.
Right.
And maybe they have a series of those. And maybe they can even make future predictions and stuff like that. That is not rationality. So now let's move into the topic of, yeah, but animals, the high primate, they have a language. Now, Donald Davidson Wittgenstein, you already quoted Wittgenstein, correct? And what's the other? Robert Brandom. A lot of these guys are Kantian. All of them are going to say animals, even the highest primates, do not have a language. Wilfrid Sellers calls this language requires concepts,
Right.
and animals don't have concepts. They have
That was my
proto-concepts.
number one reason. I listed 10 on why I believe animals are not rational or moral entities or agents. My first one is a lack of abstract thought. So what if they
Yeah,
can't conceptualize ideas such as justice, morality, or infinity, and language, and having a language would make an attempt to communicate or convey those abstract ideas through, you know, auditorial vibrations, mouth noises, written language, something like that. I don't think the dolphins are communicating to each other about the afterlife while they're swimming. They may be communicating about, watch out for this over here. We got to go in this direction. Hey, you're falling too far behind from the pack. Oh, okay, we need to slow down or we need to speed up or stuff like that. But it's not that is a different understanding than contemplating universal principles or engaging in meta thinking or considering not only the world but the nature of thought itself. This is why we're Homo sapiens sapiens, right? When you get back into those Aristotelian categories of essence, we are not just thinking agents, we think about thinking.
yeah,
That is an order of activity that is above anything that any form of animal communication has ever demonstrated or been observed by animals in the wild.
yeah. So in order to have, and this is what Sellers, Brandom, De, De Vries, trying to think of all the other like Salesian Kantian like scholars, um, that they'll argue they don't have a language because language has to have propositional content, right? And they can't actually form this. I'm going to give an illustration that deals with this. But in order to create propositional content to have a language rather than a proto language, um, requires a lot of things, right? So obviously perceptual capacities,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Um, but notice as you move more towards the abstract part of what a language and propositional content actually means is representation and to have a representational system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's interesting. I have a quote here from my thesis advisor. It will become important to note that Sellers, at least in his later work, our basic perceptual capacities also benefit from the sophisticated, evolved animal representational systems involving proto-concepts of objects, object tracking abilities that are our natural animal inheritance, in which are possessed in various forms by both non-language using and language using animals like ourselves. So maybe that's, and all of this is going to be couched in terms of, in order to actually say you have a language, you're going to have a lot, what Sellers calls the logical space of reasons, a kind of framework that involves beyond just animal representation, but a much more sophisticated representation, of which we're going to talk about is abstraction. Okay,
Right.
so let's take Momo the ape. So Momo, what's the amount of, so they'll be like, but sign language is a language. I've never liked that. Sign language is derivative of, right, actual formal languages, correct?
Right.
I don't think that it can be considered a language in itself because it's derived and is contingent upon actual natural languages. But even if I granted that, whatever. Momo learns 86 words, sign language, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Momo can discriminate. Momo actually has animal representation. So what Sellers would call proto-concept. So there's a type of he means conceptual. Something's being kind of represented. Momo has the ability to perceptually distinguish, correct? Has memory, and even has some possibly ability, as you saw in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the ability to discriminate between something false and true. Okay. So you teach Momo, oh, red ball, right? And Momo can use all of these things, animal representation, proto-concepts, memory, and stuff like that, to distinguish and pick up the red ball and not the blue triangle. And various things. We could go. We won't go through all the details of the experiments that they do. This is how I try to get through to my students. But there's something Momo can never do. So Momo has the word red ball and can do all these highly intelligent cognitive abilities and these proto-concepts. Do you know what Momo can never do?
A blue ball.
Momo can grasp red ball and cognition. Can have animal representation of this. Momo can never grasp the ball as red.
Right, the category. That's what I meant by
Yep.
It's a one-to-one relationship between the symbol and the thing, and
Yes.
they can't understand the categories of symbols. And you had a much more beautiful, eloquent understanding on no true language. That was my number 2. And I just kind of summed it up as that human language is so much more complex, and that animals, whether they use sounds, gestures, chemical signals, they are not utilizing symbolic language that conveys abstract, hypothetical, and creative ideas, enabling the transmission of culture and knowledge.
Yeah.
So knowledge is relegated to lived experience within the animal kingdom, which maybe they can warn. Maybe they have a way that they could warn another animal within their species to not do XYZ. Maybe again, the experiment done with crabs, and that some got electrocuted, and then all of them didn't want to go over to that tank because they didn't want to get electrocuted. But that is not symbolic language. That is not hypothetical thought. That is not creative idea making in the transmission of culture and knowledge that happens historically through generation after generation. That is a totally different process.
Yeah, and think about, because a lot of people didn't understand, well, what's the difference between red ball and the ball is red? Like, one's a name.
Exactly.
The second one is a lot of things. First of all, it's a concept. It forms within the logical space of reason. So it's not just, as we'll see, human beings don't just have a one-to-one, even if they could abstract and get a universal, because that's what's actually one of the things that's going on. Is it's not a name, it's an idea. And you see this, I like to give an example that children go through. If you give a child a soccer ball and call it ball, they think it's an isomorphic one-to-one relationship, that's the name for that thing right there. And then you give them a tennis ball and they're confused and you call it ball, right? Because, well, wait a minute. How can that one thing be, that one name be for the two different things?
Exactly.
And then, I don't know.
And that's the difference between symbolic language, is that we can understand that a word means a category as opposed to a specific one-to-one relationship to a thing in the world.
And at some point, the child will get a eureka moment. And they realize that ball is not a name in this isomorphic relationship to the entity, but an idea. There, they've just reached the level of abstraction. Okay? So animals can't do that. They cannot. So to make a funny joke, all animals are nominalists, which is funny because, as you pointed out, to embrace nominalism is to become a beast. Like, this is crazy. Exactly. All these philosophies we're doing, it's like it's returning you.
Well, and what do they advocate? Everybody who promotes nominalism is a return back to sexual immorality, pedophilia, abortion, essentially ritual murder, like all these things which when we define human civilization as a progress from, now progress is a return to.
Yeah. So, but it's not just a concept now that they have a universal. They actually have the ability Universals exist in a whole sphere of reason, right? And other concepts. So there's this kind of web, right? And this is what Sellers means is the logical space of reasons. So, right, the logical relations between different universals and all of this stuff. And then you take another thing, this, right? You take a particular and you subsume it under the universal. This is a red ball. So you have two concepts, ballness, redness, then a third thing, this, under the concept, and then what? A representation within the logical space of reason, i.e., language, of predication and the rules of grammar and logic. Are you kidding me? Do you really think the animals do this? They like, that's crazy. It's like, we know that they don't.
ALC's got a new T-shirt idea for patristic faith. It's
What's that?
all animals are nominalists. It's got a
Yes.
double entendre, right? So animals don't understand metaphysical categories, but all human nominalists are animals. It works both ways.
Nice. This is interesting too. Davidson goes on to say, he's basically going to give an argument why like animals don't even have beliefs. Anyways, do you want to
Yeah,
hit
we got a
other,
couple more questions.
yeah, hit those while I try
Somebody,
to find it.
sincere hypocrite sent in $5, says, if animals only react to simple input output, almost like a machine, do they have any sort of free will at all if they are acting on instinct? I'm curious what your response is. I already have an idea of what I would say to that.
Well, first of all, I want to avoid kind of Descartes actually thought animals didn't have souls and were just machines. I think animals have souls, not
Me too.
human souls, but like what Aristotle says. And so I don't think they're just simply input and output. I think like the things that we were talking about, proto concepts, and all these different abilities, that makes a difference, so that they're not anything like machines at all. However, as you'd point out, Patrick, that they're ruled by instinct. Okay, so they don't. What is it that, for example, Immanuel Kant makes human beings so special? And he says infinitely superior to animals, no matter how much your rationality and your autonomy. So basically, if you're mentally retarded or enslaved or something like that, you're still infinitely superior and more precious than an animal. And he says reason and autonomy, right? Yes, we have instinct, but guess what? Our rationality and our autonomy is never so diminished that we can't rise above, right? There's something not special about us. So animals can't do that. So I think they're totally ruled by their instincts and their desires, because they don't have reason. And they can't actually think about this and be like, look, there's something not good about living my life. So you see that but that doesn't mean they're machines. That's what I would say.
And to your point, I would highlight a difference between animals and machines, even though I was making a correlation between the input output and the instinctual drive regarding the relationship between machines and animal cognition, if you will. But as we already highlighted, the emotional capacity. So anybody who's owned a dog, and I suppose for cats, I'm not a big cat person myself. I know FDA, he's a cat guy, but dogs certainly build an emotional connection with you. Like, they comfort you when you're sad. They want to be around you. They celebrate when you're happy. That is something a machine doesn't. I don't believe a machine could do it. So I believe which is tied with having some type of a soul. So is the soul of an animal the same thing as human beings? No. But there's a divine spark there somewhere that allows a sort of emotional connection that I think transcends whatever the AI will be able to do. Maybe your robot girlfriend will pretend that she has an emotional connection with you, but I don't believe actual emotional connection can be programmed. But in regards to the animal, and you're talking about free will, I do not believe animals have free will, because as soon as you bring free will into the
They're
conversation, you
moral.
now have to
Mhm.
talk about morality again. And
Yep.
I think most people don't believe, even those who want to say animals are rational, believes that animals are moral agents and should be held guilty for things that they do that transgress a quote unquote moral code. But if you have a dog, for example, and you train, everybody who's trained a dog, you can put a treat on the floor. If the dog's untrained, they run and they grab the treat, but you can work with them where they can deny their instinctual drive to go get the piece of food immediately and sit there and be obedient. Maybe you go and tell it to do another command, or maybe 2 or 3 commands, but then eventually you reward it with the piece of food. And so my point is, what FDA was talking about earlier is how animals in the relationship with humans can acquire things like discipline in ways that maybe aren't totally natural to a dog. If there's a free food available, you go get it, but you can build that discipline in. However, you're doing it again through a Pavlovian process of learning. This is not rationality. And so I say all that to just highlight that animals aren't exactly machines. They are driven purely by instinctual drive and the inputs and outputs of their environment, but they also have an emotional capacity that is distinct from machines, not to the fullness of human beings. And when we work with animals, we can see that they acquire abilities and habits and behavioral patterns that aren't totally natural to them, but the way that we get them to adopt those behavioral patterns is still through a very Pavlovian process.
So
So,
interesting. I want to see how you would answer this objection. So I brought this up to my students, and they said, in defense of animals are rational. Well, we teach and Pavlovian condition human beings, so therefore
right.
we must be the same as animals. And I thought that was kind of a weird error in logic.
Yeah.
That of course we
And I
teach,
think
like,
it
well,
goes
we have moral
contrary.
teaching. We teach these things. So if we do it for ours, we think are moral. If we do it to animals, therefore they're moral too. I mean, how would you respond to this?
Well, I would my first response was just the idea that humans are purely driven by a sort of Pavlovian drive. I don't think that's true. And I think that one of the foundational dispositions of the Orthodox Christians is that we come to suffer together. And so suffering, if we were purely based on an instinctual drive, human civilization, different points in history, different parts of the world, wouldn't do things for long-term reward systems that demand a ton of suffering in the meantime to get a goal that sometimes they won't even inherit. So, generations built cathedrals in Europe that they were never going to see. And so that, I think, is a unique human capacity, which demonstrates that we're not totally driven by pleasure seeking,
Yeah.
that there's something that drives us deeper, and that's like transcendent meaning, which highlights that we have some type of cognitive noetic faculty that is above just the environmental conditions that we're in, and making sure. But there is a sort of Maslow's hierarchy where you can't fully put an emphasis on these transcendent categories if also you're malnourished, war, there's all this chaos around you. There is some type of hierarchy of needs there. But as a species, I do not think that we are totally driven by a Pavlovian response to pleasure, reward, and pain, because so many things that human civilizations have done throughout history is really embracing the suck. As right, isn't that the Marine saying, you embrace the suck so that there's something better on the other side? And I don't see anybody in the animal kingdom doing that, and I don't think a bird building a nest is the same thing as the collective civilization doing something that is extremely difficult for a goal that is distant into the future. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe there's a resemblance there. Maybe there's God's telos and rationality that we can see things in creation, but we take it to a higher order, a higher level.
And I think too, one of the mistakes, this came up a lot in class, is the false dialectics between, is it innate, nature and nurture? right? So they're thinking like, well, if we're moral beings, so I thought it was a category mistake of an either or, then why do we have to be taught? If we're rational, like why do we have to, be, conditioned and taught these different things? And first of all, it's neither a tabula rasa, nor are we Platonists and think like, well, yeah, it's all in us innate. We're
Right.
born in the spheres, like Origin said, pre-existent souls. And so that's weird. But I would say is a category mistake that it's almost like saying every cat is an animal, therefore every animal is a cat.
Right.
So just because, of course, it's a distinction, it's a confusion between genus and species. So, well, of course, we're going to use teaching and stuff for animals and human. Like, I mean, that doesn't mean that because both have that, they're both identical.
Right.
And therefore, either one of the two erroneous conclusions, either we're just animals or animals are rational moral beings. Why? Because I found a similar thing that we do. Well,
Right.
they eat and drink water. So it was a really
Right.
strange thing to what that just shows you, though, that, if you want something like, I mean, it can form an illogic in your mind whether you're not even thinking about this correctly. Anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting because it was related to the super chat. Any more before, and I'll read one more thing, and then I guess we could end if you want. This is
Yeah, we have a few
kind of
more
close.
questions. I did have a thought. I just lost it though. You were
Right
talking
now.
about the
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pavlovian. No, I was listening to you, and then all of a sudden it just kind of floats out of your head. I thought it
Yeah.
was good. Maybe it wasn't, or it would have stayed with me. But you're speaking about the sort of Pavlovian. Oh, I agree. And like you said, it's almost like the word concept fallacy all over again, but it's a pedagogical methodology, right? Just because humans can learn through a Pavlovian response doesn't mean that we then are the exact same thing when it comes to cognitive faculties as animals, which also learn through that. That is one of many ways in which we can learn, a sort of pedagogical methodology for an orientation towards our environments and our world. And so that's such a conflation. As you said, it's a category error in the first place to take one way in which we can learn or understand something based on pleasure and pain, and then say, "Oh, well, look, that's how animals work." So then it's just the word concept fallacy, or I called it during my Christmas stream the symbol fallacy, right? Oh, well, pagans had Christmas or a tree that meant this. Okay, well, that has nothing to do with the tree that's meant over here. Just because there's a similar symbol doesn't mean it means the same thing. And just because we have similar methods in which we can learn about the world doesn't mean that then our cognitive faculties are equated. That is ridiculous.
It's sort of similar to the correlation equals causation.
Yeah.
Well, I see two things are the same, so they must be equal, right? It's the same kind of error in thinking as the correlation must be
Yeah.
causation.
Julius Caesar's initials are JC, and Jesus Christ is JC. Therefore, Jesus Christ is Julius Caesar.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I'll have to tell you, this is exactly, I know you've done a lot of stuff on Gnosticism, but this is how Gnostics think. And it's actually schizophrenic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the third letter on this, if turned up backwards, is qua, crow, cra, la croix, la croix. That's my drink. And la croix, XC, if I invert that, is,
It's a half moon. It's the
and
moon
it's
deity.
also Jesus Christos, it's Jesus Christ. I'm drinking Jesus Christ in a La Croix sparkling water. Like,
You see, Christianity is the cannibalistic death cult.
yeah. I kid you not, when Jay and I were in LA what was that with the Jamie Kennedy thing like a year and a half ago? There was a dude that came up like when Jay was signing books that went through the exact same sort of thing. He was like, and if you take this, it actually sounds like sun, SONSUN, but that's actually nus if you turn back. Or he did this whole explanation, and you should have seen Jay's face. He was like, oh, interesting. Well, yeah, that's an interesting theory. Where do you even begin to like tell somebody, be like, that is possibly the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Everybody in this room is that much dumber because they listen to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Rough Hands, been a Codal Crew member for 20 months, says, love you guys. Thank you so much, Rough Hands. God bless you, brother. Appreciate all the support. Charisma Mysterion throws in $10 and says, I joined late, but have you talked about the degrees of awareness? How a fish lacks emotion, but a dog seems to have it. That rationality seems to manifest in degrees amongst orders of created beings. And we have kind of hinted at that, but we haven't spoke directly on the spectrum of animal organisms and their level of awareness. We kind of just focused our discussion on the higher end. So what are perceived as the highest IQ animals. So that'd be elephants, primates, and then dolphins and orcas, whales. Yeah, I think that the ability to form emotional connections, yes, not all level of awareness, or if we're going to use the word sentience, is equal amongst the animal kingdom, but certainly at the highest levels of the animal kingdom, it's not the same thing as human beings either. Do you have anything you want to say directly about the differences between the emotional response of a fish to that of a dog? And maybe this is also true. In certain ways, it relates to the ability for the uncreated energies of God to work through humans into the animal world. Because I did see a video, for example, of a man who gets fishing lures out of the mouths of like sharks. And so he had a whole YouTube channel. I don't know how I came across it one day, but anyway, I started diving down. It was fascinating. He would dive down to the ocean. There was a particular spot, and they would bait. All the sharks would come, and then he would see if they all had hooks. And this one had a massive hook, and he was able to take it out without getting bit. And that shark, that particular shark, because it had such a scar, it was very noticeable, would come back and want him to pet it, want him, like there was some type, and that's a shark, that's a fish. So we'll say that's the highest level of a fish to some degree. I mean, it's a predatory species, but that shark demonstrated an awareness of that human and felt incredibly comfortable, where that shark would come to that person and rub up against it, showed no signs of aggression whatsoever. But again, that's sort of a Pavlovian response, that the ingratiation of human beings with the animal kingdom shows, I would argue, as the ultimate telos, which is pure harmony. But because of the fall, that has been eroded. So when you talk about a fish in your fish tank at home and a dog that's sitting on your couch, you can't really engage with the fish in the same way that you can engage with your dog and allow those energies to sort of move from you to the other organism. But the man who dives in the ocean, he's in the environment of the shark. And to some degree, we can see, and this was novel to me, that sharks actually can recognize somebody and then have some type of memory, as FDA said, and then associate that, oh, this person helped me out. I'm sure they don't understand the Aristotelian categories or what a human being is, but they know that this entity dressed like this way with these fins actually is beneficial to me. I want to come see it again. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I would expect too, I mean, when I was reading Demetrius Staniloy, the lower order, and I worked a lot about this in my PhD thesis, you would expect a material basis, right? And that even within species, there's a gradation, right? So that, I'm not talking phyletic gradualism or something like that, because I'd maintain there's a real essential, because I believe in essences, distinction between the species I would expect a gradual with, going up the different levels from plant life and the various animal life to human beings, uh, gradation, displaying more and more of the higher life of which the lower life sits material basis, um, and so you should be able to see more things that are human like the closer it gets to. But again, it's like when they say, well, we're 99% genetically the same as
Yeah.
chimpanzees. And I always say, but that 1% is an infinite difference.
Right.
Right. And this is why we can't just be like, well, just scientificize, and just put everything to be quantified in numbers. And uh, that gets me to my next point. I told the class that because science wants to put everything in terms like that's all that matters is quantification.
Right.
Well, if it's 99%, then we're only 1% difference, right? Well, no, like it's an essential difference, might as well be an infinite difference between, especially being made in the image of God. But, I had this issue come up before, like, when the COOF came up and I said, these procedures are going to be worse if we lock down and do all this stuff. And this, I kid you not, this Orthodox nurse, right? It's always a nurse going to come tell me, oh, yeah, what's the quantitative data on how we're, and I'm like, I don't need a number to tell that one thing's worse than another thing. Do you need a quantitative analysis? You have one friend and you're like, he's on drugs, he's sleeping around, he's obviously doing worse than the guy going to church. And then comes the scientist, oh yeah, by what number? 75. Like, I don't need to put a number to know one's worse. Okay, so I think there's something intuitively that we can know when you look at something and be like, yeah, I know that's worse. And maybe that's part of our noetic faculty. I'm explaining all of this because about a month before I told the class we got into this conversation, I had a dream. And we are going over this. And
All
people
right, Martin Luther, let's hear it.
Yeah, let's do dream interpretation now.
Martin Luther King, I have a dream.
I have a dream. I had a dream that everybody donated all of their savings to Patrick and I in the super chat. Now I'm just saying,
and their lives got infinitely
kind of
better.
weird that you're all here now. What am I supposed to think? So, in this dream, there was this argument about interesting stuff. This is before we actually had the discussion in class, and people were in my dream trying to argue with me that animals are rational. And in my dream, there was, I could look in the eyes of a human being. And you've had this experience. You can see without any external behavior or anything a soul. What do they say? The eyes are the window to what?
The soul.
You can see when somebody's not there, right? Like there's something off. Notice it's not materially at all. There's no behaviorist, there's no quantitative, there's no number.
Yeah. And I assume if you did a brain scan, the neofrontal cortex is firing.
And I was playing up on this premise in my dream that there's a noetic immediacy when I look you in the eyes. I'm like, you're a human being with a human soul. And when I look into the eyes of a dog, they are not. I'm like, and I told my class this dream and they thought it was absurd that like this was my argument, but I want to actually argue for it. I intuitively and noetically know through the eyes. I'm not talking about, and the student wrote in the paper that like, she thought I was talking to something about the physicality of the eyes. I'm like, no, through the physicality, a window, right? In a window, you're not looking at the glass, you're looking through the glass into something. And I can immediately tell in a noetic and intuitive way, I'm like, it's not rational. There, what are you going to say? We can do it with human beings. And when I'm taught, you've got to suppress this knowledge. You all look into the eyes of an animal and you know intuitively that's not a rational human being, a soul inside of
Right.
there.
Right.
So what you do is then you bring all this stupid philosophy in and all this stuff and be like, oh, well, but what if they right? And confuse yourself from what you already know noetically, just like the way that you know God. You know God without a shadow of a doubt in your heart. And then St. Paul says all men do, but they suppress the knowledge. They suppress it by building systems and having all these influences, and you darken your nous. And then you wonder why we can't figure out anything.
Right. And you mentioned some of these philosophical progenitors to the state of the 21st century and how we're equating animals with humans. And you mentioned the attack on Aristotelian categories of essences and natures. You mentioned radical skepticism. And one that you mentioned, but we didn't focus too much attention, is evolutionary Darwinian theory, is because that
Mm-hmm.
rejects these metaphysical universals. So it falls right into your camp of nominalism. And it posits, organisms and being is some evolutionary journey into becoming Homo sapiens, that it allows people to perceive humanity already in a diminished state of animality, that somehow we are just more evolved animals. And if we're just more evolved, then the things that we possess must be already present within the animals. Now, we're saying yes to
Mm-hmm.
some degree, but as you pointed out with the DNA difference of 1%, this is a dramatic ontological jump between a chimpanzee and a human being. And evolutionary theory, I would imagine some of these kids that are thinking that animals are just as rational or are rational, I don't know if they'd say just as rational, maybe some would say, as we are, it's because they're already working in a paradigm of thought in which man is already on the animal spectrum. And that's why I thought our conversation, beginning with the theological importance of the logos and reason and our relationship to God, and how reason is always end oriented, is so important. Because yes, we are half creation, we're half
Yeah.
noetic. Well,
By the way,
angels are created too, but you get my point. Is like
yeah.
we're half noetic, and then we're half of earthly creation, and so we stand at this unique middle ground. And Darwinian theory just totally displaces man from this middle ground and just claims that he's on this journey of becoming, which then obviously leads into advanced artificial intelligence, transhumanism, AI patterns, and that it's all just pattern recognition. And this is where I agree with you about placing too much emphasis on IQ, because if we define each other purely based on IQ, well, then if we're going to use that metric, everybody working in tech believes that we're going to be surpassed by the AI systems. But is that the only metric of importance? Is how quickly you can process pattern information? Because already we're beat by the AI. You can plug into your Chat GPT or Grok or whatever AI you use, and it can pull and process information way faster than we could as an individual. But are you saying that that is superior? Are you saying it's a more advanced entity in the world? Of course not. Of course not.
I had a funny thought. Sorry.
Go
What you were
ahead.
saying was not funny. It was serious. I remind myself that. And it was really good. But in the midst of that, so I didn't make like I was laughing at what you were saying. I was laughing at thought that came into my head that a possible response would be, well, when you're retarded, everything looks retarded to you. If you have a retarded philosophy that makes you retarded, then of course everything looks retarded in an animal or like, and of course you're going to be thinking this stuff. Like,
Right.
anyways,
We have another
um,
question. White Lightning 777 throws in another super chat. Thank you very much. They say altruism in animals, such as wild dolphins saving drowning humans or a dog leading someone they don't know to their sick owner, shows rationality.
well, can we do that to program them into AI to do? Oh, look, it's intelligent and rational because it's been programmed to save us. Again, we have to, and I'm going to go after these super chats and to define more specifically what we mean by rationality. But it's the same mistake. Just because rationality shows the ability, like that we're trained, we receive education, altruistic, emotions, and stuff like that. It's a category mistake to say that therefore everything that has that shows emotions, altruism, and stuff like that is rational. Just as saying that every cat is an animal, therefore every animal is a cat. Does that make sense? So
Right. Yeah. Again, it's another logical, in a sense, a category error. And I will agree that, I was surprised to learn that there's never been a recorded wild killing of an orca on a human. And that orcas are killer whales are the most, the apex predator of the ocean. They kill dolphins, they kill anything that they want, and they can hunt as a group, which is also very unique. But are they making an altruistic choice to not kill humans? I don't know. This is certainly beyond. I haven't come across a philosophical paper giving a definitive answer on why orcas and dolphins don't seem to be violent towards human
there's a
beings in the
special
wild.
relationship.
Yeah,
That's it.
I don't know. Maybe it
Again,
has
they're
to
getting
do with,
closer to us, and I would
yeah,
expect you would see more of the kind of things that are displayed in human beings the closer to get to us, but by no means is that actually rationality. Look, once they can repeat back to me my 24 premise argument for tag or start doing divine liturgies, then maybe we can talk about rationality.
right. And I'd be curious what some of the people think on why that is, that these higher intelligent now, to the same reason we can see that wild elephants and wild chimpanzee have certainly attacked human beings, homo sapiens. So can we limit it to this understanding of high IQ or pattern recognition across species? No. There is something interesting happening though with the whales and the porpoises that allows, but I don't know what it is. Maybe it is that they know that we're not a threat. At the same time, is it rationality for reason, the catalyst for Moby Dick, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, it's based on a real whale hunt, and people were killing sperm whales in mass out of Nantucket, and one of these whales ended up, sinking the main fishing ship. Now, was that a rational decision? Was this a self-preservation? Was the whale in its high IQ able to recognize that there was a threat and it did what it needed to do to take out that perceived threat? Um, you know, but we're using, again, the semantic problem here is we're using words like
Yes.
altruism. How do we know what the dolphin who carried, what was the boy from Cuba that got carried by a dolphin halfway across the 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 ocean there between Cuba and Florida? Um, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they recognize some sort of similarity between us and they understand the threat of sharks or various. I don't know. The dog that goes and gets somebody for their owner who's fallen in a well or something. Is that rationality? Is that altruism? It's certainly an emotional connection or some type of bond between species. I don't know how we would define that. What would you
Yeah.
say?
Well, I think it's just more of the thing that the article is just even the scientific uh analysis to be wary of like didn't it say anthropomorphization? So you're anthropomorphizing the animal and saying, well, that must be altruism. That must be because it displays these similar things. And so again, this ignores like some of the kind of more fundamental issues that, and I think it's again really kind of bottom up. I think a lot of us are trained to think that we can resolve and figure these things out empirically. Why just
Mhm.
go up piecemeal and just look at the data? If it has this and this and this, and then I go up, this is why we need our metaphysics to tell. It's like you can't figure this stuff out empirically. You can't just
Right.
look at and be like, well, it looks like it's reason because of the issues we're talking about. We have theory laden stuff. We're going to impute various biases. We're going to anthropomorphize. Like I said, if Or if somebody's retarded, everything looks retarded to them. Then somebody who's not retarded, who's a rational animal, everything's going to look rational to them, right? Well, it must be, and that ignores that. That's why you need a metaphysics. You don't determine empirically. That's going to something like Aristotle. There's real essences. There's distinctions between, and ultimately that it's grounded in, like I said, we can end all of this. How do I know they're not rational? Because God, it told us, the one who is in the position to know, revealed to us, animals are not rational moral beings. Like, shouldn't that be the end of the conversation?
It should. And I would argue when it comes to the dog or the dolphin, saving a human, that the only thing to me that provides an explanation that seems satisfactory is that any sort of empirical methodology, I don't see how it would come to an ultimate conclusion. But if there's a spiritual reality and component to the world and our relationship with these animals, now it makes a little bit more sense that maybe at certain points, animals are acting out something that is part of God's divine rational plan for creation itself. People in the chat, in my chat, were highlighting that that there's many videos of animals saving other animals of a different species in the wild. I recently saw a video that was an anomaly of this tiger, adult tiger, didn't kill a baby deer and allowed it to like stay with him. Now, at the same point, do you think if that tiger didn't have all of its needs met, would still allow and protect that little doe? Of course not. Of course not. And that's partly when we're getting into the rationality and being free moral agents. This is why in humans we condemn cannibalism, because that tiger, once it gets hungry, once its needs are not met, it will easily kill that little deer. It's not like there is no moral boundary for it preventing it to do so. Certainly it's interesting. It's anomalous. The fact that it plays with a little baby deer and it's an adult tiger. Yeah, you don't see that very often. We don't understand the reasons for, but the difference is that if a human, again, getting back to Moby Dick, actually, the Nantucket, when that ship was wrecked and they're all in their whaling boats, 7 of the 12 crewmen died and were eaten by the other crewmen. Now that was for survival, but it causes in the moral question. Is it better to die, or is it better to eat your friends or family? Some of these people were family for the story that Moby Dick's based off of, and they ended up eating each other for survival. That is animalistic, and when we can recognize that as humans. The question is it, would you do the same? I don't know. That's when we're put in a position where I think we are rational agents, where we can choose to make a decision. And this is the whole life of the saints that goes in opposition to our instinctual drive for survival.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bobby C just sent in another question, said, why assume the animals are altruistic versus God using the animals similar to Jonah's case? That's a good question.
Yeah, and I was surprised somebody hadn't taken Barnum's ass from scripture and be like,
what'd you call me?
It's talking about it's talking, so it must be rational. Obviously, we all grew up watching Mr. Ed. A horse is a course, of course.
Well, and to this question too, if animals aren't rational agents, can God, as the ultimate rational agent, use animals for his own purposes, like saving the Cuban boy that was coming from Cuba and, held onto the back of a dolphin for like a day? Yeah. Absolutely. But you have to also posit God and posit the reality of revelation, and that there's a transcendent reality, and that there's moral objectives and an objective truth and all these different things. But in my worldview, and Father Deacon, that's absolutely possible. God could use animals for providential purposes.
All right. Any other ones before I end?
Yeah, last one. Harry Serpano sent in $5 over on Streamlabs, and he said, in terms of creation, angels have angelic tongues and free will, but are not created in the image of God. God created all creatures from similar materials, but similar biomachinery doesn't make us all the same. We have souls and noetic faculties. They don't.
Well, that was, you could go see my paper on the theology of the icon, talks about that the image of man is in Christ, such that when we're made in his image, we're made according to the prototype of man. He is true man.
Right.
And this is something that is rumored in tradition to cause the devil to rebel, that he would become like man. Obviously, he probably didn't understand that the theology we just explained. Maybe he did. But yeah, I would agree with, that's why angels are not made in the image of God. They're rational, noetic, and
have free will.
And so in that sense, moral beings, but like they're not created in the image of the second person of the Holy Trinity, in which the image of man is.
Our brother Jim Bob just threw in a very generous $50. Says, "Merry Christmas! Christ is born. Glorify Him."
Nice.
God bless you, Jim Bob, and the family. Hope you guys had a blessed Christmas and Nativity. And yes, it is time to glorify our Lord and Savior. Thank you so much, brother. And then Mud throws in $10. Says, "I grew up in northern Wisconsin, hunting most animals. I was stunned by city people's reaction to me saying I hunt. They almost all reply with the same question. Do you really kill Bambi?"
Yeah, there's a problem there. Notice where this is coming. People who work on farms, who hunt, who are connected with nature, they're not thinking these things, right? It's city folks that are disconnected with God's creation that come up with all these stupid, silly things that, like, is it Bambi and you'd kill?
Yeah. If we wanted to, I had a few more. I was on 4 or 3 reasons why I don't believe animals are rational. I know you had something you wanted to work through. Do you want to read yours first, or?
Yeah, it's not long. It's just
okay,
a paragraph.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is Donald Davidson. His argument, so that we would explicate from that they're not rational. Rational is to obviously have a belief. And he says, he's basically making an argument. In order to have a belief, you have to have a concept of belief. He says the concept of belief, this amounts to the following. To have a concept of belief is, for example, to have the concept of a propositional attitude. Notice animals probably don't have that. To understand that what one believes might nevertheless be false. And this means grasping the difference between truth and falsehood, i.e., knowing the difference between true and false beliefs. So that's why they were trying to test that with the monkey or the Momo or whatever. Thus, without having quite a lot of beliefs about what a belief really is, one cannot have the concept of belief. And without that, one cannot have any beliefs at all. And from this, it follows that without having the concept of a belief, one cannot have any concepts at all. For without having quite a lot of beliefs, one cannot have concepts. So we get, without having the concept of belief, one has neither beliefs nor concepts. QED. That's enough to prove, I think, right there. That's a great paragraph, right?
Yeah.
That just summarizes
concise and to the point. You want to say anything more about that?
So again, he's pulling what we would call kind of epistemic holism, or holism of the mental. You like to think of it's kind of what I hinted on earlier, that but they have ideas and stuff like that. But wait a minute. Ideas don't exist in a vacuum. Ideas are a network according to a whole host of different ideas that form what Quine would say, a web of belief, right? So words all of that was to just like kind of go against the kind of verificationists, right? The proposition tree is green is true and has meaning if it has a one-to-one isomorphic correspondence with the reality that the tree is green out there. And all that was kind of thrown out when we start to look at the nature of language,
Right.
that all of those are hinging on a whole web of different concepts and universals and a sphere of, this is what we mean about the logical space of reason. And so that even belief itself requires what? Other beliefs, which requires a concept of beliefs. And so if you don't have a concept of beliefs, and it's clear that obviously animals don't, and that's the argument he's making, then you don't have a belief. So animals can't have beliefs, but beliefs is one of the necessary conditions to have knowledge and to be rational, so they're not rational. That would be the summary of the argument in a deductive form.
And we didn't hit this enough, but when we're talking about rationality, where would you define the instrumental use of rudimentary understandings of reason within animals? So again, if we're going to use one of the super chatters was bringing up the point, it was White Lightning 77 about the dog, his owner's in trouble, and then they go and find somebody to try to draw attention to it. I don't think it's totally out of bounds to say that they utilize some form of rudimentary instrumental reason. I'm still not comfortable saying that they're using
The
rationality.
word that everybody's using in the literature is cognition. So I think reason is not helpful to, again, that's that anthropomorphic. If we defined reason within the terms of like the kind of Kantian perspective or Aristotelian or any of the philosophers that we cited, that is an actual inappropriate word to actually, and it's confusing. That's part of the problem.
It is.
So
That's what, because I'm trying to
it.
get at. So what, maybe that's a great point. Maybe it would be more accurate to say they're using instrumental cognition for problem solving.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's highly intelligent. I could even say that.
Yeah.
It's highly intelligent cognition. It has proto concepts, is Wilfred Sellers says, and the rest of them. There's a proto even language and stuff like that. But that is not what rationality means. We just defined, given several examples of defining that. And
yeah,
those are necessary conditions, but they're not sufficient.
Right. Glitchy Rhythm throws in $5, says, I came in late, so I'll go back, but I'm a fan of you both and appreciate this content. Great topic. I sent these to my friends that don't agree. And then 3 Orthodox crosses. Well, hopefully they'll at least appreciate and listen to our approach to the topic, because Father Deacon's already dealt with some of his college students, essentially making the affirmative claim that animals are rational. So it's not unheard of, and it certainly seems to be a growing disposition among people. But hopefully they take into account many of the things that we're trying to lay out today. Now, I just want you to lay out whatever your thoughts are on some of these last 6 points or 7 points that I had on why I think animals are not rational entities. Number 3, and we haven't focused on, we actually, for a logic professor, you haven't mentioned logic a whole lot in today's conversation, but number 3 was the inability to engage in logical reasoning. So they can't understand nor apply formal logical principles. And human rationality involves structured reasoning, including drawing valid conclusions from premises which animals lack. I think that was implicit earlier. We kind of hit on that, but we weren't emphatic on the fact that animals are not logical. And let's just put that there. And so when we're talking about the instrumental use of reason or the use of rationality itself, remember, logic are the guide rails in which the rational process is bouncing back and forth, trying to get towards its ends.
I can hear the objection in my head. Well, neither can children or mentally retarded people. This is where Aristotle's distinction between first and second actuality is really important. So the distinction is between, you can't have second actuality you can't have actuality unless you have the the ability or potency, right? So obviously rocks do not have the ability to reproduce or something like that. Okay, so Aristotle's thing is that so somebody is potentially a mathematician or a musician. Okay. Only if you have the nature capable of acquiring something like that, but they're not actually a mathematician or musician yet. Then they learn it, right?
Right.
And they would go to first actuality. So now they could say they are mathematical or musical. Somebody's like, well, they're not playing music. Well, that's second actuality. So I can only play music or do mathematics second actuality if I'm actually mathematical or musical. Does that make sense?
Right.
So Aristotle defines the human rational soul is the first actuality of the life having the body having life potentially within it. So what that means is just because, how do I put this? Children of retarded people have logic in first actuality, even if they cannot actually demonstrate that or actually do it.
Right. They have the innate capacity, even though
yes, and animals don't.
Right. Something has occurred which hinders that capacity. But this is why FDA has been so explicit on the essence, the Aristotelian categories of essence and nature. Because even if the handicapped person or a child can't participate in that second actuality of the action, that innate capacity still exists in their nature and essence.
Yes, amen. That's a perfectly put. Thank you.
The fourth one I had was no moral deliberation. We've kind of hammered this one pretty hard, so I don't expect to say much. But animals act based on instinct, as we said, conditioning rather than moral principles. We can deliberate moral questions, right or wrong, good or true, often making decisions that go against instinct for ethical reasons. So I put altruism and self-sacrifice as examples where humans can do this. So we've pretty much already hit that one. We'll skip to the next one. Number 5, and we have not mentioned this one, is limited use of tools and innovation, and how that relates to rational capacity. So while some animals do use tools, their usage is instinctual or learned through mimicry and lacks the creative innovation seen in humans, and especially the creation of tools and technology per se. So human rationality drives technological progress, artistic creation, and scientific discovery, showcasing a profound capacity for invention through rational means. And we don't find that in the animal kingdom. So yes, monkeys will use sticks to get ants out of an anthill. That's not the same thing. Somebody mentioned crows finding pieces of bread on the street and dropping them in rivers so that fish will come up to get the bread, and then they'll get the fish or whatever it is that they're trying to hunt. Yes, in a way that's tool making, but it's sort of a conditioning, a Pavlovian response. And it's not the same thing as creating things built upon mental categories and patterns. So when somebody, designs a gun for the first time, they are envisioning this process in their mind before it's actualized. That is something that, animals, we have no evidence that animals have ever done that, created a conceptual object in their mind and then manifested it physically. Do you have anything more on the tool making one? Because we didn't really hit that.
We didn't.
What your thoughts were?
Like I said, all of those might be necessary conditions for rationality or things that you see within rationality, but they're not sufficient. And I think that's another category mistake that people are making, is that, well, of course you're going to see rational people do that, but that's not sufficient for rationality. And that's really what we're looking for, is the necessary and sufficient conditions for rationality. So everybody just keeps pointing to necessary conditions because they see it in lower orders, that it's getting closer or something like that. Well, therefore, it must be a sign of Here's a perfect example. Well, all cakes have, flour, eggs, butter, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I actually see the cake, the eggs and butter and milk in my refrigerator, so that must be a cake.
Right.
It's like, no, those are the necessary conditions for. So, yeah. Anyways, next point.
Next one was no long-term planning or goal setting. So animals act in response to immediate environmental stimuli. I've already hammered that one pretty hard. Without formulating long-term goals or strategies, humans, through rational deliberation, plan for
Yeah.
distant futures,
Yeah.
considering risk and potential outcomes over decades or even generations. And this was my point when you brought up somebody making the argument that humans learn through conditioning and Pavlovian response. Animals learn this way, i.e., our cognitive faculties are similar or the same. No, not really. We do not see a generational awareness and long-term planning that, again, goes from the conceptual to the actual. We don't see that in the animal kingdom. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, I'll be convinced when I see them developing 401k plans and creating Bitcoin
Right.
investments for the
Well,
future.
and
Then
really,
maybe we could
this would
talk.
be, I'm just going to skip forward because really this connects with my point 9. And it's that there's no awareness of mortality. So what is the ultimate rational component of humans that is planning and orienting itself for distant goals? I would say it has to do with the recognition of mortality and what comes after that. So my number 9
Absolutely.
was animals do not show evidence of contemplating their own mortality or the meaning of life. Humans grapple with these existential questions and engage in philosophical inquiries. So, and again, it gets back to the long-term goal planning, and it gets back to where we began this conversation with the logos and Christ's incarnation re-sanctifying the rational capacities of man that were used in the fall itself to gain something that they didn't have, that God didn't give them access to in the first place. And that Christ and the incarnation and the proper use of rationality is figuring out the ultimate long-term goal, which is salvation.
And you could bring in Heidegger in this too, because I mean, the Heideggerian phenomenology is really informative. That the being there is different than all beings, right? Because the being there, the Dasein, is the only being in whom is being towards death. And what that means is it has a conceptual understanding, right? Not just like an animal, like, oh no, in face of danger, of the future in which its being will no longer be. And that affects the way that it is being right now. It
Right.
has this projectedness and throwedness, right?
Yes.
And this kind of pulling from Husserl, this kind of phenomenological stretchedness, right? I think is what you're talking about. The very being of the being there, the Dasein, the human
Mhm.
being, is a conceptual phenomenological stretchedness into the future and
Right.
the past. Whereas Kierkegaard says, we understand backwards and we live forwards.
Right.
Animals don't do that. That's
Right.
another
No,
kind of.
that was right on it. And VP said animals don't have the conception of the past and the future. And that was exactly what I was going to say. As soon as you brought up Dasein, I thought um the throwedness of the casuistry and the continuity of the immediate moment is the
Yep,
reality of the animal life.
yep, exactly. So we can learn stuff from philosophers.
And then so that was, yeah, my 6 and 9 were
Here
kind of
comes
connected
number
there.
10 is number 10.
Well, I got 7 and 8, and then we'll get to 10. 7 was
Oh,
an
dang,
absence of
shoot.
self-reflection. And
Okay.
we've kind of already hinted at this
Yeah.
when we're talking about cognition, self-awareness, consciousness. But animals lack the ability to introspect or evaluate their own thoughts and actions critically. And I don't think anybody could argue that no matter how intelligent your dog is, I saw somebody say, well, you guys need to get a border collie. Even if you have a border collie, let's say it's the smartest border collie in the entire world, is it really thinking about its actions throughout the day in a critical way that's reflecting on whether it made the right or wrong decisions? Of course not. Of course not. So humans, we engage in self-reflection. We question beliefs, behaviors, and identity, which is central to personal growth and rationality. And then number 8 is, we didn't talk about this
point.
too much, but it gets into symbolic language, and maybe we should speak a little bit on it, is no artistic or symbolic expression. What is, and this is a long philosophical discussion. What is the role of art? Why is art uniquely human, and what's the purpose for it? Well, we see there is no artistic or symbolic expression with the animal kingdom. While some animals exhibit behaviors that may seem creative, like the elephant that's captive in a zoo and somebody's gave it a paintbrush and it paints moons or its own an elephant-like shape, still not totally self-aware, still not actually artistic and totally self-creative. So these are driven by instinct or immediate practical needs. Humans create art, literature, and music as expressions of deeper meaning and emotions and abstract ideas that have nothing to do with survivability, has nothing to do with immediate pleasure. Now, it's pleasurable when you see beautiful art. Don't get me wrong there, absolutely. But my point in the artist going through an arduous process to create a beautiful work of art, there is no immediate reason for somebody to do that outside of
no
the expression of
practicality.
deep meaning.
Yeah. That's the great thing about art. It's not practical.
Right. And as we get in a pragmatic, technocratic society, we see the devaluation and the degradation of art. I mean,
Yeah.
it's rare now to see good art. It's rare to even see a good movie. It's rare to see a beautiful painting that symbolizes something deeper. That's why there's still such a reverence for, medieval and even, I know we're Orthodox, so we got our own problems with Renaissance art, but you get my point. Is at least when you look at the statues that Michelangelo carved, again, we're Orthodox. We don't do statues and naked Davids, but the ability to carve something out of marble and have like skinned indentations, I mean, that is incredible. And then number 10, my last and final reason.
I make that
right?
argument all the time.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. You cut out for a second.
No, here we go. Let me do the drum roll. Number 10.
I feel like Christmas Vacation here.
Go.
Number 10 is the inability to develop complex societies. Right. So while some animals live in groups with social structures, these are governed by instinctual hierarchies. Again, not rationally constructed systems of governance or law. We build massive societies codified in laws, ethical principles, rational deliberation about justice and fairness. You cannot show me any entity in the animal kingdom, even dolphins and orcas, where they develop complex societies. They have, yes, group formation. Yes, they have multiple entities in a pod, but that is not a complex society. So,
great.
Anyways, those were my 10 reasons. Do you have any thoughts on any of those, or want to reaffirm something?
No, I think that's great. We've got to wrap it up soon because I got to go eat.
Okay.
And
well, let's do that. We have 2 super chats. Justin Henley threw in $5 over on Dono Chat. Thank you so much, Justin Henley. God bless you, brother. Merry Christmas to you. He said the animal lovers might hate me for this, but I don't think the use in their defense of animal. Okay, hold on. Let me read it again. The animal lovers might hate me for this, but I don't. It just says the use in their defense of animal rationality. Ought we as Christians care more for the least and worst of humans more than a single animal? I think that gets back to your Aristotelian categories. Is not the least of the human species more important than the highest creature in the animal kingdom?
Yep. Absolutely.
Absolutely is. And this is sadly why the whole fur baby phenomenon is so demonic. Well, Emmanuel says Pavlovian stimulus. He renewed his Codal Crew membership for 22 months. Thank you so much, Well, Emmanuel. God bless you, brother. Merry Christmas to you. And Glitchy Rhythm throws in a generous $20. Thank you so much, Glitchy Rhythm. He says, I'm not much of an animal person, but I feel especially compelled to pray and give thanks when I hunt game. It's such an absurd feeling, and I feel super grateful cooking dinner for my family for something I feel I earned. Thoughts?
That's very orthodox. Absolutely. We're Eucharistic beings. We thank God for everything that He's provided, especially for and you're much more in touch in nature, I think, where you realize that God provided that animal for me, for sustenance and to feed my family, and so you should pray and give thanks for all things, especially your food.
Yeah. And I think that's the appropriate way to, I'm not trying to be the Lion King here, but there is a circle of life. And I think there is a reverence we should have towards the animals that we kill for sustenance. And that's just part of the condition of the fall that we're in right now. So, anyways, that looks like that does it all over here on YouTube. Father Deacon, thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining. This has been a great stream.
Great
2.5
stream, great
hours
talk.
discussing animal rationality. I hope people found it interesting and useful.
And if
is there
not,
any-
you're an animal.
yeah,
Should
if
be
not, you're a
locked up in a
nominalist, right?
cage.
All animals are nominalists.
Yeah.
Is there anything you have to shill? Anything that you can commercialize and sell the people on? You got coffee, Patristic Faith Coffee. Go subscribe to
Got
your YouTube
coffee,
channel. You're
that's
tagged
correct.
on my YouTube channel. So if you're over on my
Thank you.
channel, he's tagged in the title. Take you right over to Patristic Faith. Go give him a sub. Tell the people whatever you need to tell them. How they
I'm
how
still
they can help
selling
and support.
courses, through the Patristic Faith shop there, and tutoring as well. There's a couple people that I tutor once a week in philosophy, and if there's enough interest, possibly I might build out a epistemology course to do a 16-week Canvas, fully interactive college course. Right now, I only have one person that said they're interested, but if I get a couple more, it would actually be worth my while. So if you're interested, shoot me an email at fatherananias@patristicfaith.com, and we'll start that up in January. For those of you who are in the Texas, Houston area, I'm working on writing a paper and delivering that February 14th for February 14th and 15th, 2025 at Holy Protection in off Beach Nut in Houston. So I think that's about it. Thank you.
We got
for all
one.
your
Justin
support.
Henley's asking about Montanica. Any
Montanica
word or news
is
on that
all.
for 2025?
Yeah, you can find the save the date on the website. I haven't opened up tickets yet because I'm still working with the board to calculate all the costs. As you know, each year it gets more and more expensive because we're trying to improve. It's this year's theme. I shared with Bishop Maxim, and he agreed with this to be, it's Therapia, what Orthodox Union. He is the keynote speaker. And then Father Vasilios Thermos from Athens, who's also a therapist, medical doctor, and Orthodox priest. And Father Panagiotos, who is a licensed psychotherapist. And they're going to be the speakers. So I'm cutting down the speakers this upcoming because people were just too exhausted when we're putting like 6 people in. And so I've limited to just 3. And what we're going to have is workshops. We have 2. One's an addiction counselor, Orthodox guy, and the other one's another licensed therapist and other priests there. Instead of doing more talks, like people presenting, we're going to have workshops, like people struggling with pornography, addiction, anxiety, whatever issues. And they'll basically have a questionnaire, anonymous, it's not going to be shared, but we'll put them in whatever particular group, and we're going to do kind of more of those workshops, like hands and uh, yeah, kind of more practical stuff. So that's it. I'll try to get all. I'm hoping that I'll get the calculation on how much it'll cost, so that I'll know what the tickets. It'll probably roughly be. It might be like $10 more than last year, and then I'll open up tickets. I promise in
Great.
January for sure. Yeah.
All right. And you guys, if you want to support my work, you can always go over to my website and become a website member. We got all of our show notes put up over there. So if you'd like to support my work, you can just go with this link right here, davidpatrickharry.com/register, become a website member. If you want to sign up for a one-on-one session, or if you want to sponsor a stream, shout out to Justin Henley. He just sponsored a stream on Fools for Christ. We had a great stream covering some of the more prominent and important Fools for Christ. You can do so with that link right there. And that's going to do it for us, guys. God bless you all. Hope all you had a blessed nativity and Merry Christmas. And we love you. We appreciate all your support. And I'll see you probably Sunday. So as always, until next time, God bless.
God